a proposal developed by the Growers Group, that we continue on the II reporting in order to gather more data. We start to require on all extraction facilities in the GMA automatic metering intelligence, meter reading, so that the self-reporting goes out the window and we start to understand really what's going on in the basins. There is a question about whether or not we can get that done by 8/16, which is what Ag recommended, August of 16. And if necessary, we might have to provide for some, and before I say if necessary, Simtech's been consulted along with their experts, and they say, we think we can do it. It's a tight timeline, but we think we can get it done. But if it can't get done, we're going to need a fallback to make sure that all reporting is accurate from that point forward. And so if we were going to come back to your board with an ordinance change, we would probably also provide for this alternative compliance measure. If you can't get the meter on, if there's some problem with your installation, we go lock out the meter so that you can't tamper with it, and then we make visits and read it manually. Of course, if that happens, it's going to require, you recall when we brought this issue to your board before, when we had the $1.5 million grant, a big issue, and one of the reasons we didn't accept the grant was that people were concerned about access. If we're going to do this, we're going to need that access, and that will have to be spelled out in the ordinance. The group also seems to be losing their patience with those we have to contact multiple times to get the report data and correct the report data. So they want to set some very hard deadlines, and they want some really hard penalties if you pass those deadlines. One of the suggestions was that if you did not get your reports in by the deadline, which your board can establish in the 2 reporting periods, that you don't, your entire extraction would be subject to whatever the prevailing surcharge rates would be. That's just a suggestion, but it came out of the Growers Group discussions. They also suggest that we increase the surcharge to incentivize compliance. In other words, it may be more beneficial to just pay the surcharge as we have it and overpump than it is to actually try to live within some allocation. And what that level is, I'm not sure at this point, but that's something we'd work with the group and bring back in an ordinance modification to your board. In conclusion, emergency ordinance E hasn't reduced the absolute amount of groundwater extractions, and if your board were to consider today, rather than going with staff's recommendations as presented, instead going with some sort of reductions, which would create some confusion and reporting problems, Ag has asked that you do so before March 2016 so that they can prepare as necessary, I guess, buying plants and so forth. And that concludes my presentation. I'd be happy to answer any questions. I've got some backup in the audience for help if need be.
Okay. Let's deal with a few questions up here first, and then we'll go to the audience.
One of my questions is about, you said that it might not be possible to get the automatic meters installed by August. And I'm wondering, are there too many wells, too few installers? Are there too few, are there some areas where there's a transmission block, or what is the problem there?
All right, you ready for this? So we had this discussion today. There's some administrivia that has to take place. The original idea when Simtech proposed this to us was that it would be a sole source provider. So that gets rid of a lot of administrivia, bidding process and so forth, and I'll describe that in a minute. It has subsequently morphed into, this is going to have to be bid because there are several people out there who would like an opportunity, several suppliers who would like an opportunity. So a bidding process is going to be somewhere, from start to finish, and that is, we've got a specification that's good that we can use to bid and advertise, to the advertisement period, to the receive, review, recommend, your board approve, and then issue notice to proceed and actually have the contractor on site, 60 to 90 days. That's just the way the state law works and the way the schedules will work.
And that'd start after the next meeting because it's not on this agenda to go out for requests for proposals.
Backing up a little further, we're in proof of concept. Semtex just started installing. I think they have 8 or 9 installs in. There are more coming. They will be finished this week. They're going to run it for 2 weeks, and then they're going to say, we've proved that this works, and then we're going to start to we'll start the specifications in parallel, assuming that this is going to work. But the specifications have to be written, and then what we learn in the proof of concept have to be incorporated into the specifications. The specifications have to be tight. Part of the problem with making the specifications tight is that the database that we use, saying this is what we got out in the GMA in the way of installations, is all self-reported, and there are a lot of problems with it. Incorrect wells or incorrect meter types, serial numbers. So we don't know if we don't know to the level of detail that we're going to need to know whether or not we're just replacing a register, or the meter has to be replaced, or the installation has to be changed because it's underground, or it doesn't have the links it needs for flow. All of that's got to have that inventory and that sort of analysis to determine what the potential costs of this are going to be, so we can give your board good information. All has to be done before the spec is finished. And then after the spec is finished to everyone's satisfaction, you still have that 60 to 90 days, and at that point, the installations begin. And then once the installations happen, Jack can speak to how fast he thinks those can go. So that's part of the problem.
So we're probably talking July before it would even get to the board to be approved.
We were thinking, and today we were thinking June. But yes, that's ballpark.
Okay. I have another question.
Go ahead.
On the under next steps in the staff report, there's a few paragraphs, and then there are 5 other proposals, elements of the proposal. And the last one is one that you did mention: raise the agency surcharge to a level that disincentivizes extractions, which are greater than allocations. And so has anybody talked about how high that's going to go? Because I can remember when we raised the general surcharge to what it is now, we had a room full of people telling us it was going to put them out of business. So it obviously hasn't. How high do we have to go to where there's a disincentive?
The answer is unknown at this time. I could tell you we've done some sensitivity analysis at the staff level, and we've shared it with some members of the growers community, but we don't have consensus yet. Okay. But the number is somewhere north of where it sits now.
I assumed that.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
It may be as much as 2 or 3 times north.
Anybody else have any questions? Gene.
Thank you. Jeff, just a quick question. I know you don't have cost numbers yet, but is the contemplation that the costs for both the equipment as well as the installation will be borne by the GMA or by the pumpers?
Unknown at this time. We're not sure how we'll recommend that to your board. I believe that there is a room in the recommendation that your board spend some money on it, but I don't know how much at this time.
Jeff, do you have a sense of what kind of surcharges are being collected so far? Director Craver mentioned that it seems like our level may not be a disincentive enough, and it seems that we've heard that there are not a lot of surcharges being levied at this point.
I don't, and Mandy's off today, but we can get you that information.
It would seem that would be an important part of that decision process. If we're going to raise that rate, do we have a bunch of people paying it already and being able to absorb it or not?
Right, we can bring that back to you with the item if this is the direction your board goes.
Yesterday, Jack came out and put an automated meter on our well, and they were proud to say they would be done in 20 minutes. It took more than 20 minutes because my antenna had to be elevated, and that compounded the problem. But I watched the whole process. It's a micrometer, digital meter. 4 screws come out, the unit goes in, 4 screws go back in, it plugs into their transmission box. They run a live test to the supplier of the box in New York, and to see if they can get signal strength. And once they know they get signal strength, they're done. So it's a is actually, if you have the right meter, it's a very, it would meet the 20 minutes that Jack talked about, but they got no signal based on where they mounted it near the meter. We did some hand holding and found the sweet spot, and I saw today when I went by, you guys put that in this morning. So I can't say that every meter is going to take that short a time frame, because this is a meter that was primed, ready to go.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, sorry, at this side. So at this time, we only have 2 antennas covering the entire GMA. So the coverage can be, in the proposal, it's we're going to have 6 antennas. So there's more, the coverage is denser, and there's redundancy in it. So that may be part of the reason why they had to move your antenna.
And I think, and Jack told me that they, earlier that day, put in, I think, 2. I think you put in another one this morning. And in every case, they picked up the antenna without any problems. Ours was the anomaly. And he had actually been out to the property right next to the fence line and got a good test signal. So it was a surprise to you folks but it was a simple fix once they figured it out. Mechanical meters or some other variety, I don't know what it is. So I didn't realize we had to go through this bidding process, but it is what it is. But I think, Jack, there's 8 or 9 already up and running, something like that? Okay. So the beta test that we put in play is, in fact, I think, Jurgen, they've done your wells, if I recall. So there's scattered throughout the county to verify the antennas. The antennas, they're not all in place. If the beta test works, adding more antennas just makes it even that better. So, yeah.
What's the length of time for the proof of concept period? 2 weeks.
I've got 3 questions for staff. One, I just want to confirm, if we go on the schedule and somebody doesn't make it, for whatever reason, they don't have the electronic, that by itself doesn't incur the penalty. It's just that if they don't make it and they don't report, then they incur the penalty.
That's correct.
So as long as they report accurately and we can verify, because it would be some kind of verification, then there would be no penalty that they would incur. They just would have to do that until they can get this electronic reporting.
That's correct.
Right. Second question. You said that you sort of vaguely said there's probably some evidence that we've had underreporting, to be direct. What evidence is there that there's been underreporting?
The IAIs that have been reported, some of them are as low as 0.3, 0.4, and I'm told by AG that that's just not possible. It's in the number of instances that we have them reported. I suppose it's an anomaly that could happen in certain cases, and Jurgen knows more about that, and the growers know more about this than me, but that's the conversation I heard.
So in practical sense, a 0.3 or a 0.4 is not practical in terms of you couldn't really produce that crop with that
water.
Level of water. My third question for you is this. I want to try to, because these things are complicated issues, I just want to try to summarize, and I appreciate your directness in terms of trying to say that. Basically, where we are at this point in time is M&I did reduce as much as we had targeted them to reduce.
That's correct.
Ag has not reduced as much as we had targeted them to reduce.
Arguably, yes. There's an argument. There's an argument about yes, but yeah. From my own perspective, they haven't reduced as much as your board would like.
And based on that, we originally had planned that sometime about now, we would be saying, okay, now we have to do further reductions in our emergency ordinance. We'd have to call for even greater reductions. For example, taking the IAI instead of down 25%, taking it down 35% or something. That's what was scheduled. It's
actually a little bit different, but your board had already contemplated 2 10% cuts that would have occurred earlier than this.
That's right.
Had we reported back to your board on schedule.
We didn't have all of the data at this point.
All right.
But instead of doing that, instead of instituting those cuts that we had originally talked about, because we have some growers that that appear to really be complying and in the growers group are expressing what kind of hardship it would be for them because these are important decisions for them in terms of their livelihoods. We don't want to make the decision on the cut until we know we have accurate data. And so we're postponing the cuts, but only with the caveat that we will be on a really firm path to get verifiable, credible data that allows all the people that are playing by the rules to know they aren't being taken advantage of by the people that aren't playing the rules. Is that?
That's a big part of the decision to make the recommendation we're making. Another part is the symmetry with the water markets that are coming on, needing this in that. And another part is that it will be a gigantic administrative mess to change back and forth between allocation systems, just as allocation systems are about to be proposed, which your board may adopt as early as this fall.
It may not be very practical to try to adjust the emergency ordinance at this point in time, given the data that we have, and that would be difficult also. So for all those reasons, focusing on trying to make sure we have good data is your recommendation in terms of the way we should go forward. Thank you.
Okay. Let me go to the audience. Anybody in the audience want to speak to this issue? Jürgen?
Representing the Oxnard Pleasant Valley Grower Group. And I think, Supervisor Bennett, you have it exactly right in your articulation of what we need to do and why we need to do it. One thing that I would say to make this not look as bad as it might appear, and that is that if you look at the baseline pumping at 83,000 acre feet.
Are you?
Which chart are you on?
I'm on table 4.
Thank you.
If you look at the baseline pumping there at 83,000 feet and then the crop year pumping of 100, then the quick conclusion is, well, gee, they increased pumping by 17,000 acre feet. But recognize that no surface water was delivered. So in the average, you have surface water deliveries all the time. During this particular crop year, for the first time, there was no delivery in the PTP line, and limited, if any, deliveries in the Pleasant Valley line. And those deliveries are somewhere on the order of 25,000 acre feet a year. So if you had those deliveries, then pumping would have been less by that amount. So need to bear that in mind. I can say from our operation, we came in right under the wire as far as the IAI, and we rent land to others who grow vegetables and strawberries. We do the sod. We do raspberries, and it was all we could do to come in at actually 0.99, and we had to slow down our crop rotation, and for all intents and purposes, that's the same as fallowing. We just waited for a few months before we replanted.
Okay. Anybody else? Bob?
Robert Aranio, Consulting General Manager for Crestview Mutual Water Company. Based upon what Mr. Jürgen just announced or spoke about right there, we have a serious disconnect in understanding of what is the GMA here for. Your responsibility is not to ensure that they get surface water. The fact that they got surface water and used that in lieu of groundwater pumping does not change the fact here that we have a significant amount of overdraft that's going on. This whole program was sold to us that 2 trains were leaving a station at the same time. M&I would get there, and then Ag would come along. Well, it doesn't appear to be happening here. And that concerns me. Based upon the priorities that have been put in place by United for whereabouts any surface water that comes off that river and how that will be used, we know at United that PTP is probably not going to get water for a very long time because our forebay is in such horrific shape. B, with environmental concerns and challenges that we're facing, the quantities in what we were able to receive through the Freeman diversion will probably never be seen again. The golden days of the Freeman diversion are probably over. The world has changed due to environmental concerns that we have to take into consideration now, that we're not going to be able to harvest as much water. Therefore, surface water is not going to be as readily available. And we have a huge hole that is getting worse and worse and worse each and every season. So the GMA's responsibility here is safe yield and stop seawater intrusion. It's not to get recycled water. It's not to provide surface water. It's to get the basins in balance. Thank you.
Could I ask a question, please, Mr. Rodeo?
Yeah, go ahead.
So are you suggesting that we should adjust emergency ordinance E and we should do cuts to ag today instead of staff's recommendation?
No. Given the fact of what's coming up in front of you and understanding the challenges there will be for GMA staff, no. But what I am offering here is let's not try and cloud the numbers and what they are presented with things that are extraneous and do not portray the situation as what it is. Don't go down the rabbit hole of chasing the logic that because they didn't have surface water, then the groundwater extractions aren't as bad as what they were.
Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Bob. Anybody else? Carol.
Carol Schoen, Zone Mutual Water Company. I would just like to request that the board recognize all the effort and meetings and time that is being put into getting our allocation plans in place. And they are certainly in the Las Posas. That plan is set for January 1st of 2017. If you make changes, and we're going to have to issue for 5-month period, say you start that at the end of this cycle. So from August 1st through the end of the year, we have a 5-month period where we're going to have to change and re-educate, and you have to change, the GMA staff has to go in and change software and everything else. I think it takes us off task. We're working as hard as we can to get the GSP plans in place, the allocation plans, understand the water market and everything else, with the goal of starting that January 1. To have a very short-term change, I think, is going to just cloud us and take us off task. So I just ask that if we can set everybody with the goal of January 1 of 2017, and in this process we bring to your board, as we have scheduled, you're adopting our charters, we're committed to doing what we've laid out. Let us do it and not try and put more changes in place before the beginning of next year. Thank you.
Okay.
Carol, could I ask you a question?
Carol?
I'm going to put you on the spot again like I did today at LPUG, but I think it's an important point that gets heard in the public meeting. In our discussions earlier, you mentioned that Zone Mutual actually had a decrease in water extractions. Can you relate what that discussion was about?
Yes, and I was looking to measure our reductions against the prior cycle, not the base. But if I look at the prior reporting period to the most recent reporting period in total, because we deliver east and west, so it's combined.
East and west,
we are
Las
between
Posas.
17 and 18% reduction.
Okay. And one of the things that we indicated was that this was 2014 versus 2015, and 2015 being the driest year on record, and you still demonstrated an 18% decrease in pumping.
17 to 18.
So I think that's an important point, that many of the mutuals have in fact reduced pumping very significantly, and that part's not really shown in the numbers.
Okay. Anybody else? Okay. Let's. We have a recommendation from staff. My sense on this is that staff's I'm okay and comfortable with staff recommendation. And I think, Steve, the summary you made is correct. And I think the comments, the folks in the audience, each one in their own way is correct. And I guess the reason I believe that we need to keep doing these items is partly what Carol said, partly what we went through historically. We put Emergency Ordinance E in place when we didn't know really what the future held for us. That was a monumental thing we put in place. We actually had a plan to go to the state to give ourselves authority to get on property and do the things, and the state passed the Sustainability Act. We acted on that very quickly, took on the responsibility of being a GSA. Last month, we approved $1.1 million, the biggest contract this agency has ever let in its existence, to move this item down the road as quickly as we can. In that time frame, since we drafted the concept of Emergency Ordinance E with these checkpoints along the way, we've got grower groups that are meeting that never existed before. We've got discussions going on about markets. We've got discussions going on within a technical group that's been refocused, and a allocation group that's going to be focused. So when you actually look at all the things that are moving us quickly down the track to put ourselves on a sustainable operation, I would agree with Carol that I don't want to get off track. The train has left the station. I think Bob's issues are correct. We put 2 trains on the track. That was exactly the analogy that I used when we passed Emergency Ordinance E, and I think that analogy is good. I support these recommendations because of the work that you, the constituents, have done in conjunction with staff. I think it's really a compliment to all of us that we have finally come to grips with the reality of the situation, and we are responsible for getting ourselves out of this problem. So we're not getting groups fighting. We don't want to have meetings. No, we're not going to meet. No, we're not going to deal with it. The contrary is more evident. Groups are meeting, huge discussions going on, kinds of things that come out of those meetings to finally come to grips with the fact that we need an automated reporting system, to come to grips with we may have to change our penalty structure, that there are some fundamental flaws with IAI and we need to replace it as soon as we can. We now have those processes in play. So I support staff's recommendations. I think it's important to understand what the recommendation is here. What the board is as I see it, the board is basically saying to you and to staff, these items, there's a lot of holes in them. We don't know exactly the details that have to go in. But do we want to look at these items and put these items in play to move ourselves forward? And my answer to that is yes. The staff, in conjunction with the groups that have been meeting, and I think Jeff has worked very hard to follow the board's recommendation that we have a huge public outreach process, and it appears to me that is going on, and we're listening to each other in the process. I think that's good. So if we accept staff's recommendation, what it really means is Jeff's got more work to do in conjunction with the consultant to fill in the details on these items, bring them back to this board, and then we'll have the debate whether it should be X dollars or 2 times X dollars for the penalty. What will the timeline be for IAI? We'll know if the beta testing works at that point. All of these things are working simultaneously, and I think that's really the important message here as much as anything.
Mr. Chair?
So, yes.
Yeah, I think because of the way this is written, and even with the change in the recommendation, I think we need to go through these, because as I read this, it says if you go to page 5 of 6 of the new one, not what's in the packet, but the new one. It may be the same, but I'm looking at page 5 of 6 of the new one. It says next steps. And then first it says, staff recommends no change be made to M&I temporary extraction allowances, and it goes on. So that's real clear. Then it says, staff recommends that your board consider requiring all M&I extraction facilities be equipped with the advanced metering technology. And then it says staff has met with the growers group, and if you get down the third line of that, it says, or the fourth line, the grower group recommends staying the course on the IAI in the interim. So those are 3 recommendations. And then it says other elements of the proposal are as follows, and it lists quite a few things. And so it says require that all extraction facilities, so this would be agricultural, because we've already required that M&I have the automatic reading things.
Clarification?
Yes.
It also, anything that's able to pump water, so inactive wells as well.
Okay.
Everything that could possibly extract water will have a meter and a telemetry device. That's what we're recommending.
Okay. And so we asked who was going to pay for it. So if we're going to pass a motion that requires it, we've got to talk about who's going to pay for this. So that's the first thing I think we need to discuss. That's number 1 under other elements of the proposals. Then it says require the allocation groups, LPUG and OPV, present their prospective allocation methodologies no later than September. Well, that's fine. Increase enforcement activities starting with August, so we'll have some time to decide on how much we're going to increase and how much money we're going to devote to that, and that would come in the budget, I suppose. Establish a firm no exception agricultural reporting deadlines, and then it says down here, one suggestion is, so if this is going to be part of the motion, excuse me, we need to get rid of a suggestion and just say the late penalty is, and we need to discuss if it's going to be this much or not. So I don't think we're ready to have a motion. And then it says raise the allocation surcharge to a disincentivized level, and we haven't discussed how much that's going to be. So before we can adopt all this, we need to talk about what it is, and if we're not ready to have part of it in the motion right now, then we need to drop that out and say that we want that to be brought back to us at a certain time.
Okay, I would disagree that, here's what I would disagree that we need to go through an exercise of trying at this stage, at this level, to go through and try to plug in specific numbers and timeframes. I think that leads us down a rabbit hole of long discussions, and we go around in circles, and every time we've done that at the board level, we get nowhere. What I would propose is that the motion ought to be a direction motion, and it may not even have to be that. It may just be an agreed upon, we give staff direction, and that is, they have created in here a series of activities. The first question is, do we want AMI on all extraction devices? I think the answer to that, my answer to that is yes. Come back to us with the protocol, the timeline, and how you're going to do it. Require the allocation groups to present no later than 2016. It's because primarily LPUG and OPUG have said they are working on these, and I think they can meet that time frame. So we've given them an outside date. I believe OPUG has indicated they may actually have it done by May, so we've given an outside date. Increase enforcement activities. That's a staff direction. Staff, figure out how you're going to fill item 3. With regards to 4, yes, there is a statement in there that says a suggestion is that the reality is they've got to work up. Do we want a no exemption ag reporting policy? Is that our direction to staff to give us those details of how that would work? Do we want staff to sit down and figure out a way to raise the surcharge level to disincentivize extractions? All of these items, with items 1 through 5, in addition to the items above, require effectively that staff go back to the back room and work with the constituents to figure out how to make these palatable to everybody and accomplish the goal. And I think, if not trying to put words into Jeff's recommendation, but I think given the strict timeline that we have, rather than telling staff to go do things, Staff is asking, these are the things we think need to be done. If we do these, we're not wasting the board's time. Am I correct in the way I said that?
You are, and it's presumed that we'll bring back something that looks like an ordinance that has all this for your consideration in its specificity.
So I would submit that we don't, I think it's a folly and a very slippery slope if we try to debate here what that dollar amount ought to be. Staff needs to put their thinking cap on with the constituents and answer the fundamental question, does it in fact disincentivize? And therefore, that's what this number ought to be. I don't know what the number is, but they've got to do that homework. Does that make sense?
It does, but I'm a little troubled with the way the proposal is worded as well. In looking at number 4, apart from establishing no exception firm deadlines, that's fine. If you keep reading, the next to last sentence actually imposes a penalty on the entire extraction. It doesn't say what that penalty level will be, but we haven't even discussed whether or not that's an appropriate level for the penalty, whether it should be on the entire extraction, some portion of it, some fixed fee or something else. But that's buried inside that recommendation. I don't know if we're ready to adopt that without having that discussion. You know, I have no problem with the recommendation that we consider, you know, raising the penalty fees to a level that disincentivizes over extraction. But that's not what this says.
If you look at this is the single page that you handed us where you've rewritten the regular agenda. And in that it says emergency ordinance review, agency extraction reduction report, new item. Recommendation, receive and file a staff report on progress towards achieving the 20% reduction of extractions mandated under emergency ordinance.
We did that.
We could do that. Number 2, approve proposal developed with the growers group to improve the reliability of extraction reporting by well operators from extractions from August 1, 2016. What we've gotten in here is an outline of the things that have come up in some of the previous grower group meetings, the details to be worked out by staff, but the real recommendation is, that's what staff's asking for, is to continue that process with the growers group to improve the reliability of extraction reporting. These are elements of that process. So I think that's self-explanatory. And then it says provide direction.
No, it isn't. Let me tell you why. Okay. Because the two things that say staff recommendation, are we not being asked to approve the first 2 paragraphs of next step? Because it's very specific here, approve the things developed with the growers group, which I gather are from the 3rd paragraph on down through number 5. Otherwise, it looks to me like if we're approving things done with the growers group, then we're off with the growers group talking about what's supposed to be done with M&I, and that's the only thing anybody agreed with. So I guess I'm confused here.
Everything under written proposal was discussed by the growers group. So everything under next steps was discussed with the growers group. So you can look at it that way if you like. So,
okay. Well, I was just looking because it didn't say so. It says the bottom things were discussed with the growers group.
Let's go ahead. I'm sorry.
Okay. Steve.
No, go ahead.
Dave.
I was saying perhaps the way to solve that is to rejigger the recommendation and say approve a proposal to be developed with the growers group, so that it's not specifying in some way that what's written here is what we are approving today.
Well, let me just say one thing. And we've divided this up into growers groups, and then we got M&I. So I would hate to have all of the recommendations on what's going to be imposed on M&I come out of only a growers group. I just don't like the way that's stated.
Sure, I would agree with that, and if I could, I appreciate Director Craven pointing out that in her experience, vague motions usually cause problems down the road, but sometimes if you're clear that it's not that you're trying to be vague, it's just you're clear that we want to go this far with this motion, but there are more details that still need to be worked out, as
Right.
long as you're clear about that. That's what I think that happens here. So if I could, if you take under next steps the 3 staff recommendations, the first staff recommendation is staff recommends no change to the M&I temporary extraction allocation. Well, no change means take no action. So
Right.
that doesn't have
That's
to
okay.
be, that's not. So then the second was, staff recommends, second paragraph, staff recommends that your board consider requiring all M&I extraction facilities to be equipped with the advanced metering. That is the same point as the growers group recommendation 1.
Right.
So it's not like these two are in, it's not like staff's giving us one recommendation in the growers group. Staff is sort of saying, we agree with the growers group recommendation 1. And then the third paragraph says,
Well, it adds a lot to it. Recommendation 1 adds a lot to.
Sure, but.
The second staff recommendation.
Staff recommends at least part of recommendation
Right.
1, and then there's more there. And then staff also recommends that we adopt in the recommendation, not here, but, let me just stick with this. The third one, the growers group recommends staying the course on the IAI in the interim. That means we make no change. So really, 2 of the 3 staff recommendations that you read are to do nothing, make no change. And the one is embedded in the growers group proposal, which is that we install,
Right.
the electronic metering. So I think that if we take a look at the growers group recommendation, I do appreciate the position that Director Mulhart was trying to take there, which is basically a way to say it, which would be different than Director Borchard, because you obviously got the M&I side of it, is just, if you look, the classic example is number 4. That's the one that both Director West, has brought up also. Number 4, let's just read it and just take it very clearly. Establish firm, no exception agricultural reporting deadline starting August 1, 2016. And the deadline for that other period would be April 1. The deadline would be November 1. Okay, that's not vague. That's very
Right.
clear. All right. Then those failing to report by the deadlines would have their total extraction. That reporting period subject to late penalties. Director West is saying, hey, that may be something he wants to talk about, legitimate, but it's not vague. It is a very clear recommendation, and it is not staff's recommendation. It's the growers group's recommendation, saying we've got to really have incentives for people to report, and we're tired of these people that keep dragging their feet. So it's not vague, could be subject to discussion. But the third thing, somebody may say, those failing to report, somebody could ask the question, you could simply drop the last one. A suggestion is that late penalty be equal to, you could just say that their total extraction be subject to late penalties. And then
I could go along with this if we drop that last
Sure.
sentence.
So the last sentence could instead say, a late penalty to be determined and brought back at a future meeting.
Okay.
That's very legitimate. So then we just have the issue, are we clear? I think that when we have the growers group making a recommendation like this, and we have the atmosphere, the unique atmosphere that has been created here, I'd be hard pressed to say I would go less than this when people are saying we need the disincentive. So the same thing can apply to item 5, raise the agency surcharge to a level that disincentivizes extractions, right, which are greater than allocations. And we could say, and direct staff to come back with a recommendation,
Right.
which they would develop with the growers group. So is those 2 changes?
Those 2
address
changes,
that?
actually 3 changes. One is dropping a whole sentence in number 4 and adding something that says it's going to direct staff to bring it back at a later time.
Draft staff. to
And
come
then
back.
adding the same direction to staff to bring it, number 5, back at a later time.
Direct
I can-
staff to come
Otherwise,
back
it
with
sounds like
recommendations.
we are adopting it.
Sure, got it, okay.
Okay.
Good point that you brought it up that way, great, thank you.
Staff's recommendation, so going back to staff's recommendation, item 2, under this sheet of paper they gave me that I just read from, proposed development with growers to improve reliability extraction reporting by well operators for extraction from August 1, 2016. and then provide direction to staff on any desired future extraction reductions and any attendant ordinance development or modification. This discussion over here is, in fact, a lot of what item 3 is in that recommendation.
I think,
As you
Mr.
guys
Chair,
have modified it.
I think, Mr. Chair, what Supervisor Bennett has said is that we would make the motion change, because this is kind of vague over here. Number 2 on this page, the recommendation, is a little bit vague in that some of these things were not explicit, so he has changed the wording in some of these, and I believe there are enough of us to approve it with the changes.
Okay, so you want to make a motion, since you outlined it?
Sure, if we're ready.
Okay,
Sure,
to hear a motion?
So the motion would be,
I'd like to hear the language.
Okay.
what's that?
I'd like to hear the language, the words.
Sure. The motion would be to approve staff's recommendation with a modification of recommendation 2, which says approval of proposed develop, with the growers group. And so a modification of the growers group recommendation to delete the last sentence of number 4, and that's a suggestion is that the late penalty be equal to, and replace that with, and direct staff to return with a recommended late penalty. All right. And then in number 5, raise the agency surcharge to level the disincentives extractions, which are greater than the allocations, and direct staff to return with a recommended surcharge.
Yeah.
Right.
Okay, that's your
To
motion.
accomplish that. That's my motion.
I'll second.
Okay, a motion and a second. Dave?
Chair Mulhart,
Yes.
Director Craven,
Oh,
Yes.
hold on. Wait. No.
No, I don't have any.
You had said you wanted to hear the motion.
No, I'm good with that. Thank you for that.
Okay,
It was very
now.
clear.
Okay, so now roll call, please.
Chair Mulhart,
Yes.
Director Craven,
Yes.
Director Bennett,
Yes.
Director West,
Yes.
Director Borchert.
Yes.
Okay.
Pardon me, Chair, but I wanted to speak to my motion before we voted.
Oh, I'm sorry.
And not that I wanted to speak to it because I think we're making an important transition
All right.
here, as
Something
we're
to
going
say
forward.
also
So
after Director Bennett.
if I could just.
Please.
Number one, I thought you presented a good summary overall in terms of what we're doing here, in terms of the process that we followed, et cetera. I think that it is important for us to recognize that something fundamentally has changed in terms of how we're approaching this issue of groundwater in Ventura County. This is not the same boardroom, the same atmosphere that we had 3 years ago. And it's a dramatic improvement, and I think everybody ought to feel good about that. There have been times when Ventura County has been faced with significant challenges. One was seawater intrusion 20 years ago, right? And there have been a number of times when Ventura County has come together and come up with some intelligent, thoughtful, appropriate sort of steps. We now have this sustainability challenge in front of us, and we have the opportunity to really get it right in Ventura County in the long run for everybody. And so I want to just recognize that where we are right now gives us the best chance of doing that, and that is, really having healthy input from stakeholders. But that healthy input will only stay healthy if it keeps its eye on the other ball, which we're not dealing with today, which is at some point in time, we're going to have to deal with cuts. And I just want to remind us that for the best way for it to stay healthy is for the people that are being empowered to offer significant, substantial input in the process, that we don't at the last minute take our eye off that ball or not be transparent, but that we really do it. If we do it and we get that right, in the long run, the honest growers in this county are going to have the best chance to make a healthy living in the long run. And in the long run, the people that are relying on the groundwater for their M&I are going to be in better shape. And that's really the challenge. But I'm as encouraged as I've been in terms of the great input and the work that everybody's doing at this point in time. I think it's a very significant vote that we just took here today, which was to postpone where we were going with Emergency Ordinance E, which would be, we should have been having a fight today about cuts, and instead coming together again for something better for us in terms of sustainable yield a year from now. Thank you.
Okay.
Chair, if I might, just a quickie also. To reiterate what Director Bennett said, I think Ag understands there will be cuts. There's less groundwater to go around. And what you've seen with the development of these groups is a real understanding of that dynamic. And with the development of Emergency Ordinance E, a lot of action regarding trying to save water, trying to do more with less. It's Alden Broom wrote a really great letter to our board that I think we shouldn't ignore. And it's not that GMA has a responsibility to supply surface water to growers. That's true. We don't. But what that surface water quotient of the number on the Oxnard Plain indicates is conservation, a significant amount of conservation. And I think that's what Mr. Broom was trying to point out, is that in some circles, recent articles of the newspaper and elsewhere, that it's being portrayed that ag isn't doing its part. And that just simply isn't correct. There's been a lot of investment and a lot of action, and it's very typical of the ag community in Ventura County to do that, to step up to a problem. And then you heard me ask Ms. Schoen about mutual water companies' extractions and how they've gone down. Other mutuals I've talked to have experienced those similar kinds of things. It's not shown in the gross numbers. It's what's not in the numbers that's significant. And so it's not that I think that ag is saying, don't cut us anymore, but there has been significant conservation.
Okay.
I agree, and I'm not saying ag saying that. I'm just saying let's keep going. I agree.
Yeah, well, I just want to say that I agree with Robert, which is not something I always do. But I think Robert made some very good points. And I hope that by, I am not convinced we're going to be saved this year by rain. I am not convinced that we will see a lot more rain in the next couple years. I'm not a meteorologist, by the way. I'm just a person who sits out there like everybody else. But I'm not hanging my hat on rain this year to help any of us. I just think we all have to be conservation wise. We all have to take a look at what we're doing, whether we're residents living in a house with a huge lawn or a small lawn or no lawn, or whether we're farmers growing whatever any of you grow. We have to take a hard look and say, is there a way I can save water? Would changing the crops help? Would, for me, getting rid of the grass I have help? Because kicking the bucket down the road is one thing, but at some point we don't want to reach that bucket down into the aquifer and pull out only really salty water.
Okay.
One last thing. And just to respond to Robert's comment as well, I think, Robert, you were correct when the GMA's task was only to function as the GMA was originally crafted. But becoming a GSA imports a great deal more responsibility, and while we were only concerned about extractions before, we have to start being concerned about production, new sources of production, and getting things like surface water, recycled water, and other types of water where they're going to do the aquifer the most good. I think that comes with being a GSA. It's different from what the GMA has been.
Okay. All right. Let's, with that, let's go to item number 3. Tully.
Good afternoon, Chair Malhart, directors, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Tully Clifford. I'm with the Public Works Agency, and I'm the director of the Watershed Protection District. The item before you is just a minor update, really, to the groundwater sustainability plan process. The charters from the Technical Advisory Group and the Last Posters Users Group represent the willingness of these groups to work towards defining sustainable yields for the basins and the allocation system for the Last Posters basins. We can make some minor adjustments as we move forward on these charters, but both groups have worked very hard to create the charters. I'm pleased with the stakeholder engagement process and the energy that the stakeholders bring to this process, and I feel it bodes well for producing a plan that will secure our groundwater resources for future generations. Per the October 28, 2015 board meeting, your board is not required to authorize these charters, but we believed you would be interested in seeing them, and that's why they're before you today, for that purpose only. And I'd be happy to answer any questions you may have.
Okay. Any directors have any questions? Dave? Anybody? Okay. Anybody in the audience have any questions? Brian.
Brian Bondi, Cayugas, tag member, Las Posas Users Group member. Not a question. I just want to compliment Tully as being the primary author of both of the charters that are the subject matter of this item. I really appreciated his professionalism, willingness to collaborate and work. I think we have a great couple charters here. Thank you.
Okay. Very good. Anybody else? Okay. So this is a receive and file item. All right. A motion for receive and file.
So moved.
Second.
Motion and a second. It's a regular item, so it has to have a roll call. Okay?
Chair Mulhart?
Yes.
Director Craven?
Yes.
Director West?
Yes.
Director Borchard?
Yes.
Okay, very good. And Director Bennett was absent for that one. All right. Item number 4. Kathleen.
Good afternoon, Chairman Mulhart and directors. For the record, my name is Kathleen Rydell. I'm here to present item 4. It is modification of the Las Posas Valley, Pleasant Valley, and Oxnard groundwater basin boundaries. These are just some of the key points. The groundwater sustainability plans are underway. Hydrometrics has started work. Of key importance, though, is having the basin boundaries. It's for efficiency, time, resources to get those established as soon as possible. As it is currently in, per the regulations, we will be using the DWR, Department of Water Resources, basin boundaries, as they're presented in Bulletin 118. A TAG and the Technical Advisory Group in their initial meetings reviewed the basin boundaries. They made a recommendation that the southern boundary of the West Las Posas Basin be modified to follow the Springville Fault, which is the third segment of the Simi Arroyo Santa Rosa Fault. So there's 3 different segments to that major fault system. So they made a recommendation that the southern boundary follow that fault. And since that TAG recommendation, the basin boundary modification regulations were issued by the Department of Water Resources. So in looking over the maps, and provided in your packet is the map. In fact, let me go one more slide. Here's the proposed boundary modifications that we're talking about. Whoops, back one. It doesn't want to stay there. Okay, so along the southern boundary on the north end of the map is the Las Posas Valley Basin. And the blue lines represent the DWR basin boundaries. The yellow lines highlighting the black dashes, that's a proposed boundary modification. That southern one follows the Springville Fault. And then the western boundary for the Las Posas Basin, we're proposing follow the Wright Road Fault. So you can see both the southern and the western boundaries be changed. So going back to the previous slide, in 2014, Crestview Mutual Water Company provided data, groundwater information, water quality data that indicated that the wells that they're extracting their water from are associated with the West Las Posas Basin. Based on that, one of the wells, see if this works, right here, over in here is Crestview's well, and that would be associated then in the Pleasant Valley Basin if we do not do this basin boundary modification. So what is currently considered part of the West Las Posas that the water quality is similar to the West Las Posas, well, now their extractions will be associated with the Pleasant Valley Basin. So we believe that this is a good example of a geologic boundary. If you look at the hydrogeologic, well, this is the aquifer map for the upper aquifer system. This is a potentiometric surface maps. You've seen it. The northern boundary along the Pleasant Valley goes at the base of the Camarillo Hills. That's a location of the Springville Fault. You'll see that north of that fault, the upper aquifer system isn't present. It's not present in the West Las Posas Basin. If you look at the lower aquifer map, you can see that in the northern end of the Pleasant Valley Basin on this map for 2014 fall, we see that water levels are at 40 feet, yet right across the fault in the West Las Posas Basin, we have water levels at minus 120. So we clearly see there's a boundary there. Springville Fault is what TAG recommends.
Could you point to that area, Kathleen? I'm having a hard time.
Oh, this keeps
On the
wanting to.
map, you just said the.
Right in here, you can see that it's minus 120, and you can see. And here you see at the north end of the Pleasant Valley Basin, we're at positive 40 feet above sea level. So there's clearly a boundary between those two. This does. And so there's a distinct difference in the potentiometric heads. The fault is based on water quality data we're seeing that Crestview Mutual Water Company supplied shows that their wells are more associated with the West Las Posas Basin. So in following with DWR's recommendation, we find that the fault is a more technically more defensible boundary than the blue line, which they just put along the ridge. And then they connected point A and point B to go across the western end of the West Las Posas Basin. We are recommending that the basin boundaries be modified to follow the faults. And that in doing so, also, the wells that we currently have assigned to the West Las Posas Basin will remain. If we do not modify the basin boundaries, a number of wells will be reassigned to different basins, those extractions. Our recommendation, I put in the board letter, you will see in the board letter, the process and the procedures for going forward with a DWR basin boundary modification, what needs to be submitted. This item, as far as basin boundaries, would come back to you because as one of the documents that has to be submitted to Department of Water Resources is a resolution, so we would be bringing back at a later date a resolution for you to adopt on modifying the basin boundaries, but this is to authorize staff to explore a modification of the shared Department of Water Resources, DWR, Bulletin 118 boundaries between the Las Posas Valley, the Pleasant Valley, and the Oxnard Basins, which, according to DWR, would be classified as the Oxnard Subbasin.
Okay. I had a question that I raised to Jeff a while ago. This does not require LAFCO approval because we're not modifying the GMA's boundaries. We're simply moving the boundaries within the GMA, so it's not a LAFCO exercise.
That is correct.
Okay. As I understand it, DWR has submitted a date of March 31st, 2016 for all boundary adjustments. That's their first blush at dealing with these. There is no follow. They have not listed a follow-up date for resubmittals or a future exercise going down the road. Is that correct?
They suggested dates that are possibly a year or more out, that you'd have another chance, but right now we're working on the groundwater sustainability plans. As we're rolling up the data, the extractions, it would be good to have those modifications made as we're figuring out how to get management strategies. It would be helpful to have the primary well for Crestview associated with the West Las Posas when it's seems to be, and based on the hydrogeology, more associated with the West Las Posas than it is the Pleasant Valley.
This staff's recommendation is to authorize staff to explore modification of this particular one. There are some other examples within the GMA that have to be dealt with. Tony Morgan, you correct me if I'm wrong, Tony told me that there is an issue that's being worked between the GMA, United, Ventura on the boundary up by the Santa Clara River and the Sataquai Bridge. Does that have to be, that'll require some boundary changes as well within the GMA. Does that follow in this? Is that something that we ought to be also
Can I answer that one, Kathleen?
What's that?
Yeah, that definitely needs some look, but that's an external boundary. So then you've got the other issues, the complicating issues, and we already know that that's going to be a much larger process than the internal boundaries are right now. The internal boundaries promise to become bigger later, and so it's better to get them done right now. But you're talking about where the Sataquai yard is, where our yard.
Yes.
Yeah, and it's outside the GMA. Currently mapped, but we'd have to get all sorts of consensus in order to map it in.
All right. So this would not affect that particular issue, but that issue is clearly on the GMA and United and City of Ventura's radar and being worked on right now, as I understand.
That is correct, and it has gone to TAG several times, and they've discussed it, and presentations have been made at the technical advisory group level.
Okay. All right. Tony, does that answer your question? Okay, that was a weak yes, but I heard it. Shauna's right behind you. Is Shauna kicking you as you say that yes? Yes. Oh, there's Mauricio. Oh, that's an illegal group right there. So, okay. All right, so staff's recommendation is to authorize staff to explore a modification of this issue. What's your pleasure?
So move.
A motion?
A question?
Okay, hold on a second. Yeah. But before we do let's do that. John.
John Orr from Del Norte Water Company. And I just wanted to sensitize the board and staff to the issue that while we have we don't have a dog in the fight on the Las Posas, Pleasant Valley side, on the Las Posas and west side, this particular boundary that's being suggested, the old DWR boundary, or I guess that boundary was established in 2007, that would in fact make the Del Norte Water Company what I was fearing it might be, and that is a mug wump, with its mug on one side and its wump on the other. And by that I mean that our wells would be on the east side of this line, and all of our land served by those wells is on the west side. Now, we've known this all along. We know we are in an area that's going to require coordination. But what concerns us is that in this particular case, we have never been contacted by the staff about this. We do have it's very important to us. We do not want to be administered by two separate GSPs. We want to be, and we know there's going to have to be coordination. We've discussed this with Mr. Morgan at United. We've talked with, we've been working with LPUG for some time. And LPUG has, in fact, drawn a boundary which would be to the west of this and would include our wells. So I want to sensitize everyone to the concern that we have that it would be, I think there is a way, as I understand it, and I'm going to have our attorney Neil McGuire come in and describe it, but there is a way where this notice can be given. We're not objecting to that, but where we can work with staff so that we can determine how this coordination is going to take place between the two GSPs. This wasn't an important issue until multiple GSPs were being considered. Now it is an issue, and this is the first opportunity I've had, or first notice I've had of the issue. So I wanted to sensitize everybody to that.
Okay, thanks, John.
Good afternoon. Neil McGuire on behalf of Del Norte, and I also wanted to note that I'm an LPUG member as well. And I wanted to follow up on the LPUG proposal that John mentioned. So in 2014, LPUG reached out to folks that are in what we call the West-West Las Posas area, which includes the Del Norte service area, but also other pumpers as well, to develop at that time what we were calling a management area boundary. Because again, at that point in time, I think what was envisioned was that there would be a single GSP for all of the Fox Canyon territory, and there would be management areas within that. And so we've used that. We did come up with a line that included Del Norte's wells, Farrow's wells, et cetera. And so it's further west in certain areas than what Ms. Rydell has pointed out. And so LPUG has been using that boundary for the last 18 months or so, certainly in the last year or so, as we've been having our allocation-related discussions. And I also wanted to note that in the charter that was just before you on the last item, there is an assumption in that charter on page 3 that the boundary that LPUG has proposed will be moved forward by the GMA. That's expressly called out in the charter agreement that was just adopted. And so now the GMA staff is presenting before you an item that is requesting modification of the boundaries according to the process that DWR has laid out. Again, it doesn't match right now. What's in the staff report does not match what LPUG has proposed. We understand that part of the reason for that, maybe there are other reasons, excuse me, but part of the reason for that is that this type of a boundary modification is what's called a jurisdictional modification as opposed to a technical or a scientific modification. And that requires the submittal of additional materials to DWR. And so there are concerns right now that with regard to staff that they may not have the resources to do that at this time. And so what we would request, I think, at this point is that because this is a very important issue to LPUG, to our allocation system, but certainly to Del Norte and to the other pumpers, so that we are managing those water systems in a consistent and holistic fashion, again, recognizing that there's a need to coordinate with Oxnard. What we would recommend is that, at least at this point in time, that GMA staff, when they begin the process with DWR, so they will have to submit what's called an initial notification, that notification include the LPUG proposal for the basin boundary modification, and that perhaps we can work with staff to develop the materials, compile the materials that are needed to support and rationalize that boundary modification with DWR. So I think, again, as John mentioned, this really wasn't something that has been discussed with LPUG quite a bit in the past or Del Norte. So I think, we understand the limitations there, but we would like to be able to work with staff in order to maybe alleviate some of those concerns, try to get this basin boundary proposal done right the first time so that LPUG can move forward with its allocation system the way that we've envisioned it. And we think that that will end up being a better result for the Las Posas Basin and the folks within that, what we call, again, the west-west area. So thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. Yes, ma'am.
Could somebody put this map up there and with the laser show me exactly where the two wells are they're talking about and where their area is, so I have a better idea? And maybe others have a better idea.
As my understanding is, the Crestview well is located in this area, and that is the one that we are trying to get the southern boundary modified for. The western boundary of concern are Del Norte wells, and I believe these are the wells for Del Norte. Is that correct?
Yes. And
Where do they serve water?
And they serve water over in the West Las Posas.
Okay, thank you.
So if we do not modify the boundary, it will be the DWR boundary, which they will be outside of that boundary. And then the other wells there was another, the Farrow wells. The proposal for the Las Posas Users Group is because the fault crosses through the center of some of the parcels to go to parcel boundary lines and then zigzag across and then keep the wells that I think Pharaoh's wells are in here somewhere, and they're serving land over here to keep the wells with the land that they're serving in the West Las Posas.
Thank you.
But scientifically, certainly the fault line is a lot better than the current DWR line, right?
Yes.
But the question is, it sounds to me, are you in agreement that, does LPUG suggest that you take it even further than the fault line?
That is correct.
Right.
The Las Posas user group wants to bring the line further out to incorporate the wells that are serving the land within the West Las Posas Basin. Is a jurisdictional boundary, and there's additional requirements for that. It's a higher hurdle for us to go than a geologic boundary adjustment.
So jurisdictional boundary has a higher hurdle, right?
That is correct.
Geologically, in general, we want to follow geological boundaries because that's what the science, if we're going to use science to determine how much water sustainably can be extracted.
The boundary along the edge of the Pleasant Valley, between the Pleasant Valley and the West Las Posas, is a well-developed fault,
right.
And that is serving as a very effective barrier. We can see it's
right.
a very much stronger barrier to groundwater flow,
right.
Whereas the fault along the western boundary is more. So this fault right over here, the Wright Road fault, we know that this is a transitional boundary. We can see that water from the Oxnard Plain is migrating into the West Las Posas Basin, so that is not a very strong sealed fault. We see that the fault between the east and the west boundary, there's a significant fault there. You can see tremendous head difference in the potentiometric surface. So this isn't as strong a barrier than, say, the Springville fault.
What is your timing in terms of, I know we got a March 31 deadline.
We
have time to direct you to, obviously we don't want to stay with the old DWR boundary. So we go to this boundary and let you guys work it out and see if you can come back with a recommendation as to whether you think we should take it even further?
We have several challenges. One, we have to notify Department of Water Resources what boundaries we want to. We have to provide them with a shapefile, GIS, to say where we're proposing to do the boundary changes, and then provide that to them. Then we have to supply the backup information to support that. Then we have to get a board resolution supporting the boundary change, and we have to get all that submitted to the Department of Water Resources before March 31st or by March 31st and have it complete, our submittal. So it's challenging, given just we have February and March, to get through these different hurdles and get everything submitted.
I see that this has generated a whole bunch of interest, and I have now 2 other individuals that have snuck in behind you. So let me hear from them, if I may. Brian and Andy figure out who's going to do this. Andy.
I'll go before Brian. He'll probably be a lot more clear.
By the way, be sure you note that Andy
Waters,
is an
Chairman,
alternate.
Las Posas Users Group. This is exactly what we're talking about with the edge maxing and moving the boundaries over, and not being. This is a great step forward that Kathleen's talking about. We just need to go a little bit more to make it all work. So, Brian, go ahead.
Let me. Brian. Brian, did you have some comments?
Yeah, I just wanted to echo a little bit more detail on what Kathleen said. Oops. I suffer from the same problem you were having there. This whole area is a transitional area. We have no definitive hydrologic structure that's preventing flow between this area. We know that water moves between the Oxnard Plain and West Las Posas Basin. The original DWR line was just simply them looking at where is the edge of the valley. It's purely a topographical feature. It does not affect groundwater flow. The Wright Road fault has not been demonstrated, to my knowledge, in the literature to affect groundwater flow either. So what we're left with here is defining some sort of boundary that's a transition within a transitional area between 2 groundwater basins. And so the purpose for the proposal from LPUG, recognizing that there's no definitive barrier in the groundwater system, is let's look at the water use patterns and make sure that we're incorporating, and as Mr. Orr said, keeping the wells with the land. That's simply what we're trying to do here and the purpose for it. And I believe Mr. Orr has the map here that shows in detail what we're proposing. Thank you.
Brian, are there any other places besides any other wells besides these that LPUG is suggesting should be different from what staff is recommending here?
And maybe the most instructive thing would be to look at the map. There are, Del Norte's wells certainly are the primary. There are a few other ranches that we met with the landowners in 2014. The Broome has a property. There's a VMB water system, as well as the Farrow family has a property that all fit in this situation where they're pumping wells right in this area and serving water in this area. And we're not talking about an insignificant amount of water. The Del Norte Water Company alone delivers 2,000 to 3,000 acre-feet of water into the Las Posas Basin.
And the current LPUG proposal is to bring all of that in? Has that been clearly mapped?
To include those wells, yes.
Right. So that's been clearly mapped, right?
Okay, Brian, have we done any kind of signature analysis on where the source of that water is?
Generally speaking, the general TDS trends do show a trend of increasing salinity from the west to the east, indicating that there is influence from the Oxnard Plain.
So they are recharged by the activities of United and the Freeman?
In part, yes.
Okay. I understand the need the logic of modifying the DWR boundaries and tying it to a line, the yellow line there. Yeah. I have real concerns about drawing a change in boundaries that move entities that get recharged from the Santa Clara River, United's activities, and moving them out of their responsibility to pay their proportional share of that system. And I think we could open up a can of worms that we don't want to deal with.
Go ahead.
Well, just to answer that question, that's not intended at all. There's
Okay.
no effort here to try to move anyone out of United's jurisdiction or anything like that. It is simply an effort that from the LPUG side of things, that we want to try to manage pumping in the basin. We want to have the ability to look at the water system as a whole. And because the service area is within the Las Posas basins, we think that it makes more sense to keep the wells with the land there. So it's purely a groundwater management interest. It's not any type of effort to escape fees or charges or anything like that, just to clarify.
Mr. Chair.
Mr. Chair?
Yeah.
Go ahead.
I think they've raised enough issues to make it clear that this is ripe for more conversation. But the problem is we have a deadline. So I just want to try to see. I'm going to turn to Mr. Pratt. Mr. Pratt, ask Kathleen. She said there's a lot to do. Is this something that we could take an action that would still allow a window for staff to keep working and see if you can come up with something between now and March 31, or are we up against the wall and we have to, from the dais, try to make a quick decision?
I'm going to let Kathleen, I believe there's time, but I want to make sure Kathleen's comfortable.
Is there time for us to let this work out and still meet the March 31 deadline?
We need to talk about what's on the agenda,
Yeah.
because I don't think we can
the agenda.
approve anything
we got to be
other than
careful
what's
here.
on
The agenda is simply: are we interested as a board to even consider this issue? I'm not speaking for all the members, but I am interested in continuing this discussion. Now, there's an accelerated element to it, as Steve just mentioned. So I'm okay with the recommendation of authorized staff to explore this modification. We've done other meetings on other issues that have come before us, and that is the decision of Jeff to whether or not it needs to be dropped into one of those alternate meeting dates that we have in February or early March, if necessary. So given the limitation of what's written in here, all we can do is basically send it back to you and tell the folks, we've heard the information, it needs to be looked at, and we're concerned about the timeline.
and staff can pursue talking to Department of Water Resources and submit both the geologic boundaries and the judicial boundary adjustment, and then see how those play out and being able to gather all the required information, say, for the judicial, to see if we can meet that deadline. Otherwise, we have the fallback position of keeping the geologic boundaries.
Mr. Chair, I don't think
And making an adjustment later.
Yes. Well, we need a resolution, and it has to be decided before March 31st, or we lose this window and we have no boundary changes, and then we go with what we have on DWR boundaries.
Okay.
I think we need to talk to our attorney, but I think we can only give staff direction on what's on the agenda for today, and if we want something else brought back to us, then we bring it back and make a decision at that time.
Al?
Yes, all your board is being asked to authorize here is for staff to initiate the process. You're not being asked to approve any basin boundary modifications. That will come back later. And certainly approving staff's recommendation would not rule out consideration of any of the concerns that have been raised here. Those will be part of the public input process that would start today if your board authorizes staff to pursue the exploration. My concern with deferring action today is that DWR's regulations do provide for a timeline of public outreach for consideration of that final proposal on the boundary modification. And with that March 31 deadline looming, that may be too compressed to fully comply with those regulations.
But we can today take action to authorize staff to explore a modification that they've recommended, correct?
Correct, and that would also initiate the public outreach process,
Okay.
which would address the issues that have been raised here today.
Okay.
Also move.
A motion, a second. Dave? Okay. Gene? Anybody? Okay, let's do a roll call on that one, please. Okay.
Chair Mulhart?
Yes.
Director Craven?
Yes.
Director Bennett?
Yes.
Director West?
Yes.
Director Borcher?
Yes.
Okay, good discussion. We understand the complexity of the problem. Let's move it forward. Okay, item 5.
Chair Mulhart, directors, I'm Tully Clifford. The item before you is quite simple. It's an update from Waterworks District Number 1 on their Moore Park Desalter project. Your agenda packet includes a presentation from 2014 as background information, and today what they'll do is they'll provide an update on what has been happening since then. And behind me and ready to go is Dave Sasek.
Dave.
Good afternoon, Chair Mulhart, other directors of the board. As mentioned, I'm going to just update you on changes and progress that's been made on the project since the brief that my predecessor gave you in 2014. I want to start by just kind of reiterating the need for the project. That really hasn't changed much. It may have actually become more intense in the time frame with the continued drought and the continued salinity development in the basin. So again, those main drivers are essentially the same. We got the salt plume that's causing problems for everybody in there with regards to the quality of the water. And then we have within the region, the systematic problem with the water shortage. And so this project is designed to address those two things. Hopefully get us off that imported water, that long supply chain from Northern California, which is very expensive and energy intensive. Throughout the process of this project, we've met with numerous people, and prior to 2014, everything's shown in black. Those are previous people we've reached out to, and since that time, we've continued to reach out to stakeholders and have numerous conversations. Recently, we've also collaborated with the LPUG, with Callegas, with technical staff from the GMA with regards to our groundwater model study. We've sent it out essentially for peer review. We've received comment back and made adjustments to those things. And I think we've actually made tremendous progress in terms of providing a quality report, which will be hopefully completed here in the next week or two. Just a quick overview again on what the project is, and the things you see in blue are things that have changed since the last brief. So initially, I think we had quite a few more wells, maybe 24 to 28 wells. We ran a second set of test wells, and the production rate of those wells was much higher than the first round. So we're actually looking at fewer wells in the well field in the shallow aquifer. Continue to track a membrane treatment process, so that really hasn't changed. The amount of water we're going to produce or intend to produce remains at 5,000. We have looked at the connection with Callegas, and we found that some of the conditions that they placed on us being able to wheel water through them really became expensive and cost prohibitive. So our intention now is solely to run that connection into our own system, so that's a change. Another major change, which really isn't a change in the project description, which is really a significant development, is we recently received final formal approval of a $7 million grant from the State Department of Water Resources for this phase one of this project, which is the main outbuilding of the plant, the first set of wells, and we're hoping to actually pursue additional grants for phase two, which is the second phase of wells, and for if there's money out there for solar power, because we do intend to put a solar system into our project. Again, the location of the project really hasn't changed. You see a notional layout of potential well field that consists of about 18 wells, a little bit different than what you saw before. Our intent is to start on the west end and move east towards town in Moore Park, and if we don't need as many wells, we won't drill them based upon the production that we achieve from the well field that we get there. Another slight change is, I think originally the plant itself was up on the corner of Hitch Road, and we got some feedback from the city about wanting to have it set back a little bit, so our proposal is going to show that site maybe moved a little bit further off the road to perhaps not impact the visuals as you drive into the city of Moore Park. In terms of the physical benefits, I think we've done a pretty good job of tightening up some of those numbers. There are some really distinct, measurable physical benefits for the project, not the least of which is 5,000 acre-feet of local water developed. Also exporting salts from the basins. We're estimating about 18 million pounds of salt per year will be removed from the basin. That's pretty significant. We know that that's going to contribute towards some of the goals of this agency with regards to controlling groundwater quality. It's also going to contribute to the Water Quality Board's objectives for basin management as well. So that's a concrete item there. Locally produced water, as I mentioned earlier, is much more environmentally friendly. It takes a lot of energy to pump that water down from Northern California to get it to us. Just saving that alone is going to save us a lot of energy. If we're able to get that solar field in there, that's another megawatt of power. That almost makes us energy neutral in terms of what we might be taking off the grid. So again, another concrete, measurable benefit of the project. To the ratepayers, that's a big deal. We can get the water estimating around $835 per acre foot, which is significantly less than what we have to pay our friends at Callegas. So, the citizens in Moore Park and the people that we serve within the unincorporated area around the city will be the beneficiaries of that. So what have we done so far? Again, updates since the last project brief to you. We completed our second round of pilot test wells. We put in our grant application. We got the grant. Our groundwater modeling report, again, is about 85% complete or 95% complete. We reached out to Brian Bondi from Callegas. We got his kind of over-the-shoulder peer review on an initial draft of the groundwater model study. We incorporated his comments. He actually provided some pretty good input of some adjustments that really tightened it up quite a bit. We submitted a draft for peer review to the GMA staff, and over the last few months have been in discussions with them about various technical aspects of the report. Again, I think the report, when it's finished, is going to be much more tighter because of those reviews that we've had. We've addressed a lot of concerns and moved along with that. Our CEQA document, we're about 80% complete on that. Our objective is to get our draft EIR out on the street in February. We want to get the groundwater model complete so that we can put that out as part of the package. So as you can see, we're moving along. And so far, we spent about $1.5 million of our ratepayers' money in developing this project. So that's a pretty sizable investment from the district to get this project to the point that we are today. Again, moving fairly quickly, this is just give you a graphic of the well field, the test wells that we conducted, and you can see the flow rates. We're looking at over 700 gallons per minute out of these wells, where the original round of test wells we were seeing around 200, which were closer to the Arroyo. In terms of the well field design, this just give you some numbers, and we don't have to dwell on this, but again, we intend to extract 6,000 acre feet of approximately of the groundwater. We're going to treat 4,700 acre feet of that. We're going to use some of that for blending because the treated water quality that comes out of the osmosis plant is less than 5 milligrams per liter for salt, and TDLs is at 50. So in order to be able to push it back into our system, we actually kind of have to blend it back down. So that's where you're going to see that mix of water there. And we're going to be sending out about 1,000 acre feet a year through Cayugas's brine line going forward. When we did our groundwater model study, we looked at a number of different aspects, and we had Dr. Steve Bachman. We brought him on as a consultant to work on this study for us. What we boiled it down to is really we wanted to look at our project in isolation. In other words, if nothing else changes and we put our project in there, we kind of call that the CEQA analysis. So we look at our project like an experiment. Hold all other variables constant, change your thing, and see what happens. And then we looked at two other end members, and this is one of the benefits that Brian Bondi gave us. He said, look at a kind of a worst case scenario, and then look at the most probable scenario and see what the numbers run out. And so our scenario one, is what we call the CEQA scenario. That's just our project in isolation. And that turned out to be one of the end members. Scenario two, which is the worst case scenario, assumes our project goes in place and the Moore Park District 1 sewer recycles the maximum amount of water, and then the City of Simi Valley maximizes their recycling and cuts off their groundwater desalting wells. So that turned out to be the worst case scenario. The more probable case would be scenario three, which is again somewhere between the two end members, involves lower numbers from Moore Park recycling and lower numbers from the City of Simi Valley recycling. So again, since November, again we gave this report to the GMA staff, and since November we've been talking about some very specific technical aspects of the report. Overall, I think that those feedback that we got from the board are going to tighten, or from the staff are going to tighten up our report. We did get a formal written reply back from the staff, and we're working on a response back that will address those concerns. And that letter from your staff is in your board package. You don't have our response because it hasn't been finalized yet, but you'll have that. The staff will have that shortly. So what is the bottom line with regards to the impact of the project that we're seeing from our groundwater model study? There's a lot of numbers up here, but really what you want to focus on is the box titled total for both scenario one and scenario two. And what you see is the increased benefit of increased stormwater, increased base flow, and a decrease in evapotranspiration. And basically what happens is by us taking this salty water out of the basin, we're creating an opportunity for cleaner water to come in during storm flow. And also we're minimizing some of the transevaporation that's coming out from the basin. And it equates to, it's not a surprise that it would either be equal to or less than what we're pulling out. If we tried to pull out more, eventually it would be less than, but based on the numbers that we're projecting, this groundwater model study was run at 6270, and so that's the difference between those two numbers. And our actual proposal, when we come back to your board requesting an allocation, is going to be for 6,000, so it's a little bit less than that. We also have a proposed monitoring plan. This is a new development that wasn't been briefed to your board before. We've got a periodicity of monitoring on our monitoring wells. There's 9 of those proposed in the plan. Out of our 10 to 18 production wells, we're going to put monitoring on at least 3 of those wells. And then we have existing production wells that currently exist within the boundaries of downstream of us, and there are 3 of those that the plan proposes to put monitoring on. And you can see the periodicity of those, of taking data off of those reports, and you can see the, what we're looking at with regards to the stormwater. And additionally, we have a pretty tight concrete contingency plan that we're proposing. This is one where we're still in discussions with staff on where the line is, but you can see what we're going to propose in our response back in our letter. The bottom line is there's going to be set trigger elevations. It's going to say if you hit this point, you have to do X, Y, or Z. In this case, you have to reduce pumping by 10%. You have to watch it. If it doesn't change, you have to go back down another 10%. So this contingency plan really acknowledges the fact that the GMA is the regulatory agency on extractions, not Waterworks District 1. So you have to have the authority to direct us to adjust our pumping if necessary. Again, as I said, we're still having discussions with the GMA staff on, okay, here's a graph, here's what it looks like, where does that line go? And as we go forward, that'll be a point of discussion for your board to deliberate and approve upon. And then looking forward, you notice I didn't even try to touch the laser because I noticed that we're having some technical problems there. Going forward, again, what we want to do, we want to get our groundwater model finalized, and Dr. Bachman's just making a few final changes based on some of the discussions we had with the GMA staff on their peer review. We're going to get our EIR out here next month, looking at putting our preliminary design report, getting that wrapped up. So we're ramping up to invest a lot more time and resources in developing this project. Hoping to get back to your board either through a policy decision or through a request come back to us that we'll be able to have access to the 6,000 acre feet of brackish water that we're looking for. And then we're moving forward with going back to the county, working through county staff to finalize our ability to get loans and grants and other things going forward. And then you see permits and land easements with the end objective of actually starting to produce and get some water into the system by late 2018. I know I went through this very quickly. It's been a long board meeting. You guys have heard this, ladies and gentlemen, have heard this brief before. You've had the package in your thing. So I'm happy to answer any questions you have. But pending questions, that concludes my presentation.
Any questions for Dave? Yes.
Dave, you mentioned that it'd be a pretty significant reduction in cost to Waterworks by doing this desalter versus buying state water. Do you anticipate reducing water rates to the Waterworks customers at some point?
Now, I can't answer that question. Seriously, I would think that we would probably see a drop in the rates, and we're going to have to run the analysis in terms of what else is happening with Cayugas's rates by the time we get there. But certainly, under Prop 218, we have an obligation to our ratepayers to manage cost of service versus, under Prop 218, I can't just keep jacking up the rates and gold plate things. So we haven't run
infrastructure issues in other areas of the district that are probably pressing as well.
Could be, yeah. So we'd have to look at all that in totality, but it wouldn't be beyond reason to think that being able to get half your water at 2/3 of the cost won't have some sort of positive impact on the bottom line for the ratepayers. We just haven't gotten to the point where we're bringing on a rate consultant right now, and part of what they're going to look at is how are the rates going to be affected by that. We just haven't run the numbers yet.
My second question is, if you're going to be getting 5,000 acre feet from this recycler, do you anticipate that freeing up 5,000 acre feet from Cayugas or local groundwater sources?
I would have to defer that question to Cayugas, but I would imagine if we're not buying that water, then they still have state water rights, so they would more than likely be able to swing that water somewhere else. But I know Brian's here. I don't know if he can speak to that question, but
Will it reduce the district's pumping as well, or
It-
you probably reduce your state water first, huh?
we would reduce our state water because that's our most expensive resource.
Thank you.
Okay, anybody else? Anybody in the audience have a question for Dave? Okay, very good. Dave, this is and tell you, this is a receive and file item.
I'd just like to make a few final comments,
Okay,
Chair
okay.
Mulhart.
Yeah.
What you've heard from Waterworks District 1 is about their Moore Park desalter project, and in summary, really what they're saying is they've refined their pumping request, they've improved their well field operations, and they've prepared a detailed mitigation and monitoring program to deal with the water that they're bringing up, the brackish water. However, from a policy and a financing perspective, Waterworks District Number 1 still finds himself in the same position as others like the City of Camarillo as they're trying to bring these alternative supply projects online. They did their preliminary financial analysis. They've done a lot of technical work to determine whether their projects are viable, and they're now in the process of undertaking environmental impact analysis and detailed design aspects of the projects. Again, both very expensive endeavors. And so to continue with their project, what both those organizations and probably others are looking for are some assurances from your board that their project will ultimately be approved. The GMA at this stage does not have an allocation policy or procedure to provide organizations with a gauge at the outset of whether or not their projects should proceed. I think that what we need to do to assist these organizations, and staff could certainly be a big part of this, is we could bring back a report to your board suggesting an allocation policy for supply projects that are utilizing brackish water. I think this would help to expedite the alternative supply component of the groundwater sustainability plan, but also provide the organizations such as Waterworks District Number 1 and the City of Camarillo with a lot more certainty in their planning and the ability to move forward with these projects. In both cases, we're in the neighborhood of $15 million, and neither organization have any certainty of approval. And so what I'm suggesting is that we look towards developing a policy which leans in that direction. And I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Okay. Any questions for Tully? Any questions from the audience? Okay. What we have before us is a presentation. It's a receive and file report.
So moved.
Well, hold on. Tully has raised another issue, but it's not a part of this recommendation. So at the end of this particular item, I'm going to ask, do we give staff some direction to develop some kind of protocol and bring it back to us that addresses the issues that Tully raises? So just keep that in mind. So we have a motion to receive and file this report. A second, a motion, a second. Any other discussion? Jessica?
Chair Mulhart?
Yes.
Director Craven?
Yes.
Director Bennett?
Yes.
Director West?
Yes.
Director Borchert?
Yes.
Okay, with regards to Tully's comments, is anybody opposed to giving staff some direction on thinking through the things that Tully has talked about and eventually bringing it back to the board for some kind of consideration?
With your board's permission, we'd like to bring back just an issue, a simple policy issue on what you're going to do with brackish water allocations in February.
Okay, Dave? Okay, you okay with that?
Yeah.
That's the direction to staff then. Okay, all right, let's go to item number 6.
I'll be presenting that one. Item 6 is a recommendation to adopt Resolution 2016-01, which would delegate authority to the executive officer to decide, in consultation with agency counsel, whether and when to file legal action against operators for recovery of delinquent pump charges, surcharges, and civil penalties. Currently, that action requires a specific approval by your board on a case-by-case basis. As discussed in the board letter, adoption of the proposed resolution would eliminate that requirement where the amount in controversy is not greater than $100,000, which would eliminate delays associated with agendizing these matters for your consideration, and I think would increase staff's enforcement capability as the importance of compliance grows with the issues that have been discussed earlier in today's meeting. So those are my comments. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Any questions for Al? Dave?
Just one kind of thing that came to mind in reading through this. I'm all for streamlining the process and going after the flagrant, we I think called a few meetings ago, serial non-compliers. But it seems we also had sort of a process that we batted around a number of times about notice of violation letters and, kind of a standard operating procedure. What I'm concerned about is if we set forth some sort of a carte blanche, release the Gestapo thing, that might not be taken very well. It seems like we ought to take into account what we've set up were the processes that we're going to do, and then following no action on that. I'm not saying let's take this out 6, 12 months, but after the notice of violation, you get no response. There ought to be some sort of process.
You want to address that, or Al?
Well, that process is in place and is ongoing, but what we've discovered is that there are limits to what I would refer to as administrative enforcement, which is the notice of violation process. We get to the point with some of these operators where they just ignore those letters and are completely non-responsive and are difficult to locate. And the ability to file legal action against those operators is just a much more powerful enforcement method. So it's an alternative to what you just described and isn't being proposed as a substitute for that. It's in a sense a next step. Yes. Is if that effort fails, then we move on to legal action.
Okay, so the existing procedures that are in place are going to be utilized, and then, great, perfect.
Okay. Anybody else have any questions on that? Anybody in the audience have any questions on that?
I'll move to approve and authorize the executive officer. Oh, that was the wrong one. Move to authorize the executive officer in consultation with agency counsel to initiate and compromise legal action on behalf of the Fox Canyon Groundwater Management Agency for violations of the agency ordinance code, including the recovery of unpaid extraction charges, surcharges, late penalty fees, and civil penalties.
Second.
Okay, a motion and a second. Any other discussion? Jessica?
Chair Mulhart?
Yes.
Director Craven?
Yes.
Director Bennett?
Yes.
Director West?
Yes.
Director Borchert?
Yes.
Okay, item 7.
I'll be presenting item 7 again. Jeff, for the record, Jeff Pratt with the GMA. This item, I don't have a PowerPoint presentation for you. It's fairly straightforward, and it consists of 2 parts. One is just to receive and file the charter for your information, and 2 is there's a request for $100,000 to be used for a facilitator out of the Oxnard PV group. They have been meeting. They've met some of the requirements that your board has set out for them. That's in the discussion section of the board letter. They've invited the cities, the property owners put together the group, and then they invited the cities and other stakeholders to participate. The charter that they've developed is fairly aggressive, and you'll see that it results in a recommended allocation methodology to your board on May 31st of this year. And if they accomplish that, kudos to them, and it will really help move the GSP along. To that end, they've requested some help with facilitation. It's a large group, and as you know, lots of different opinions. We didn't have time to create an agreement. We're asking that you give us the authority, council and myself, to enter into an agreement for facilitation fees. And you'll see that there's some conditions put upon those, but basically, the approval of all invoices will be the sole judgment of the agency. So, and that was language suggested by OPV themselves. That's my brief presentation, and I can answer any questions. And Jürgen Gramkow, the chair of the OPV landowner group, is here to help with that as well.
Okay. Unless you have something specific you want to say, you want to hear what we have to say first, or see if there's even. We may save, just sit right there. Yeah, Jürgen, you're not going anyplace. Just trying to expedite this thing.
Where's the budget? $100,000 allocation for an unbudgeted expense seems bizarre to me. Where's the budget that describes how this money is going to be spent, for what, to whom, and when? Because without that, it's a non-starter as far as I'm concerned.
It won't be a blank check. We'll develop that. But
That's
if
what
you'd like,
that's what we're being asked to approve, is a blank check for $100,000.
yes, you're asked to be able, trust your staff with $100,000. That's what you're being asked to do.
And I think you said, though, that there would be, as you outlined here in this discussion, somewhere, I'm in the wrong one, you outlined that it would require us to approve any invoices, so it's not truly a blank check if, in fact, the GMA determines that what they just spent money on has no bearing on solving the problem, and we're not going anyplace because it's at our sole discretion. And
There will be agreement with the terms and conditions. It can be brought back to your board. We feel that at this level, it's a piece of administrivia that you may be willing to forego. With the county, I have $100,000 of purchasing authority. With the GMA, I got $5. So there is an element of trust in this, but we'd be happy to bring it back to your board if you want to see the details.
I'm not interested at this stage in seeing invoices. I want to see the budget. Because otherwise,
That's the details of the agreement.
It's too pie in the sky for me.
That's the details of the agreement that I talked about.
Okay.
The agreement for your approval.
Okay. Anybody else have any comments? Jurgen.
I believe Jurgen's agreed to pay whatever GMA does.
After the invoices are received.
I'm Jurgen Gramko, the chairman of the Oxnard Pleasant Valley Group. To address your question specifically, Director West, I understand that it might appear like a blank check, but that's why we suggested in the language that any reimbursements be in the sole discretion of the groundwater management agency. So we're not asking you for money that you haven't had an opportunity to see where it's spent and ultimately determined whether or not you want to reimburse it. To be specific, this money is earmarked for Dr. Bachman. We feel that he is going to be a very useful person to help define the technical issues which ultimately are going to drive the negotiations. And so we need somebody in the room who can say, well, the pumping in this area has this level of yield. Pumping in this area has this level of yield. These are the boundary lines, and they're based on such and this geology and Bulletin 118 and so forth, so that we don't just have a bunch of farmers in a room that are throwing dirt clods at each other. So that's the use of funds, the purpose of the funds, and again, it's entirely in the control of the GMA as to how they, whether you want to reimburse them. To give you a sense of the fact that we're a serious group, we have been meeting every 2 weeks since November. We have done outreach to landowners in the Oxnard and Pleasant Valley area. We have about 80% of the acreage represented in our group in terms of voluntary assessments. So we definitely represent the majority of the agricultural interests. Having organized the ag interests, having brought Dr. Bachman on board, we've since also brought Craig Parton on board, a water attorney out of Santa Barbara, again to help us facilitate. I'm not suggesting you pay for an attorney, but I do think it's fair to pay for a hydrologist. And we've begun outreach to the cities. We hope to continue to have meetings with cities also on an every 2-week basis. And we're looking forward to the cities coming forward with a committee that represents their interests, and just keep moving this ball along. The May 31st date that's referenced in the letter, I think we all recognize that that's aggressive, but to give you a sense of comfort, if by May 31st we haven't done anything that's worth any money, then you have an opportunity to say we're not going to renew anything.
Can you give us some sense of what the total budget is and what percentage of the total budget the $100,000 is?
Well, I believe we've raised something on the order of $200,000. Maybe I'm off on that. The budget, Dr. Bachman's fees are on the order of $5,000 a month. And to the extent that, he has to burrow in and sequester himself in a room and work, day and night, it will be higher. But, we are using these fees to pay for his time during the board meetings and during the TAG meetings.
Okay. Any other?
I do have some questions. My understanding, or I shouldn't say understanding, my thoughts are we have a facilitation issue, and there are places where we're going to be paying to help sort of facilitate some things. So my initial support would be for facilitation, something that a professional does to help us pull everybody together. You said we're not asking you to pay for an attorney, but I'm not sure that I agree in terms of a hydrologist because, with all due respect to your process, because hydrologists also get involved in these lawsuits and all of that. And if Fox Canyon is paying for hydrologists, you'd want to make sure that those hydrologists are therefore sort of somehow supportive of Fox Canyon's position from a legal representation, et cetera. So I'm fine if the understanding is you are going to submit invoices and see what seems fair, but I just didn't want you to walk out based on and have the assumption that because you said, hey, it's going to pay for the hydrologist, that I'm necessarily, this is the first time that the idea of specifically paying for Dr. Bachman and the hydrologist has been made clear to me. I thought it was more in some other category. So I need to work through that some more, I guess is what I want to say at this point in time. I don't know whether that...
Well, I understand. I think the term facilitator would have other connotations typically, but in the context of the agricultural landowning group, we're a pretty knowledgeable bunch about water issues, and to have some typical facilitator who comes in as a cheerleader and writes things on a board, I think we're more of a let's get down to business here. Let's get to the scientific facts, and then let's argue about allocation methods, whether they be history or by acre or what have you. So that's why we think Dr. Bachman would be more productive, and there is some precedent of the GMA helping the LPUG group as well. So
I guess if you, pardon me for interrupting there, but he said pay for his time at the TAG, and it's like, are we going to pay for everybody's time at the TAG? And I start to get concerned. That's why paying for facilitation is one thing. It doesn't open up as much of a slippery slope. But we have lots of stakeholders with lots of technical ability, and I don't know where to draw the line there. Those are questions I have. I'm not saying that my position is a no, but it certainly is an issue that's not clear in my head, and I want to clearly express that.
Understand?
Yes, ma'am.
I want to address something Jeff said. I don't know that it's a matter of trust, but in my city, the city manager only has discretion up to $20,000. And after that, we need to see details of a contract to sign it, especially for something for this much. So I'm kind of with Jean. I think I need more more discussion of exactly what it's going to be and down in writing.
Okay. Jurgen, I see Shauna has Shauna's behind you, and some others have lined up behind you. Let me.
For their 100,000.
Yeah. Let me hear from them, and then if you want to make some other comments, you can come back up. Let me just do that. Okay. Shauna.
You know, if I could slip in real quick here, it appears to me that, and I can't believe I'm kind of saying this because I'm usually the tightest guy on the budget here, but GMA's been getting a lot of free work over the years. Cayugas has basically bankrolled the entire LPUG process until maybe just recently, and that's been years of meetings and facilitation and production of paper, and so it seems to me that we're asking a lot of all of these various groups to help us compile this GSP. We're actually, in some cases, asking them to do the work.
Don't forget that Cayugas set up LPUG.
Not specifically, no.
No,
I thought they did.
No, we authorized it, and it morphed itself, I think so.
But anyway, it seems to me reasonable that we would support these efforts.
Okay. Shauna.
Hello, Sean Epstein with Ventura Water. We're happy to participate. We're eager to participate. I've actually emailed Jurgen many times over the past year, but we have not officially been asked to join or and been included in this process. And I think it's being portrayed that we are included and we have been invited, and that has not occurred yet. So I just wanted to make sure that that is clear.
Okay. Yes, ma'am.
Lucy McGovern with the City of Camarillo. I want to echo Shauna's comments. I was sitting in the back room hearing earlier agenda items regarding the growers and everything, and I don't think the cities had been consulted in any of those discussions regarding allocations and what has been going on with the Pleasant Valley Oxnard group. At one point, we were told to hold on because the growers, the agricultural interests were gathering themselves, and at one point we were going to be invited. It seems like it's gone pretty far ahead if you're already setting a May deadline for setting pumping allocations factors and stakeholders. And as a City of Camarillo major player, major pumper in Pleasant Valley Basin, we have not been invited to the table.
Okay, let me make some clarification here, okay, because I hear the frustration of the cities and others. Let's go back. We've created a number of groups. One of those groups is the technical group. It is the technical group's responsibility to come up with whatever the safe yield number is. It is not OPUG's responsibility to come up with safe yield. That's not their charter. They'll input it, but that's not their charter. And at the technical group, there are representatives from all the constituents because we set it up that way. We've set it up such that the technical group's job is to come up with safe yield. Once they know what that number is, that pie is going to be split between M&I and Ag. LPUG has actually gone through that exercise. They've kind of mapped out a model that works for them. Maybe that will be the same model or a variation of that model on the Oxnard Plain. Once each group has an understanding of what their pie is, the volume of their pie, then we get down to making sure we allocate that pie within that group. And the cities are in a different boat than the M&I, the Ag folks, because there's a lot of owners of that pie within the Ag group. There's not that many owners within, and that's really what LPUG has gone through. So when we talk about OPUG and LPUG coming up with an allocation methodology, I think the briefing that we got from Brian twice now is that the M&Is will get a certain percentage of whatever that safe yield, and how they deal with that, that's going to be their problem. Within the Ag community, because there's so many pumpers, they're beginning a process of figuring out how we're going to divide up our percentage of that safe yield. OPUG is exactly in the same boat right now. And in fact, I think one of the things that has motivated OPUG to come online as quickly as they've watched what LPUG has done. So I don't think it's fair to say that OPUG is going to figure out what the city's allocation is. That's not, I don't think, a true statement. It's the TAG's responsibility to figure out what safe yield is, and we have historical pumping patterns that will define what that percentage is. LPUG has essentially used that as a basic model to begin that process. So the real question that I see being asked here is, is it appropriate for us to invest, given the restrictions that Jeff has outlined, in a process that will help the OPUG folks figure out exactly how they're going to divide whatever that numerical pie will be when TAG finishes its job. And I think Jurgen is right when he says, and I've heard him at other meetings saying, everybody in this room understands the ramifications of what we're about to do, and more are coming to that meeting. So although I agree with Steve that the facilitator concept is what I had originally envisioned, is it appropriate that the key hydrologist for that group facilitate the process of figuring out how to divide that pie within their group? And I have no problems with Steve doing that. Steve is also part of the technical group that's going to figure out what the total safe yield number is. And Jeff has told me, I think the GMA and others told me, we know basically what the pumping patterns have been and how to split that safe yield into the appropriate categories for M&I and ag. It may not be perfect right now, but we'll work our way through it. But it's not that big of a job. We just need to know what the master number is. Once we get that master number, OPUG needs to be in a position to tell us how they're going to divide that up so that their growers know what they're getting for their portion of the pie. It's exactly what LPUG has done. So I have no problems authorizing the executive officer the authority to enter into an agreement or draft an agreement with council that gives the kind of checks and balances that we've talked about, and at the same time have total authority whether to approve or not to approve the expenditure with the invoices that are submitted. So I have no problems doing that. And I have no problems to even adding to that another condition that we'll get quarterly reports or semi-annual reports, but we will get reports at this board how invoices are approved and what they're approved for, and maybe at that point in time when we don't like the way the invoices are, we will pull the plug on the whole thing. Heck, I don't know. But I'm okay building those kinds of safety checks into such an agreement. I think it's important that we keep the momentum going. And if it helps OPUG figure out how to divide their pie, I think that's important. I think it's incredibly important that we make sure that the M&I folks don't feel like they've been marginalized. And in my opinion, they have not, because that role is what safe yield is all about. That's really the linchpin of everything. We need to know what safe yield is. We need to figure out what belongs to M&I, what belongs to ag, and within each of those groups, how you're going to spend the water you're using. And basically, the city knows how it's going to spend the water it's going to use. But M&I doesn't know how to do that.
I have two concerns as you talk. One, you said first we're going to have the tag's going to come up with a sustainable yield, and then it's going to be obvious what goes to M&I and what goes to ag. I'm not sure that is obvious.
I don't think so.
And with LPUG, if I'm wrong, LPUG had discussions about that, but certainly M&I was at the table, correct? So M&I was at the table. So you're talking about, well, once that's decided, then it is appropriate for OPUG to say, hey, what are we going to do with the ag side of it? But that's one thing. I don't want to go on record walking out of here going, it's just obvious how we're going to divide between M&I and ag. Right. Okay, but I got another point. I just want to make sure everybody knows.
I'm sorry, but We met with Rob Saperstein and Jared Bouchard last week, and prior to that time, Craig Parton, our attorney, had a number of conversations with Rob Saperstein. So we are in the very early stages of organizing with the city. I apologize to Shauna that she has not been invited by Rob and the other folks from the cities, but our vision is that we have a committee from the Oxnard Plain Ag Group, and we have a committee from the cities. And those committees meet frequently. Like I said, our schedule these days is every 2 weeks. And that we do something similar to what the Las Posas group has done, which is to say the first cut on the pie is what goes to M&I and what goes to Ag. Now we can all go back in our own tents and wrestle over how we cut that up further. But that's how I see this proceeding.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
Well, I think that needs to be part of this agreement that we're looking at.
So the second thing is, I mean, as I walked into this, I read these words, the executive officer will enter into an agreement to reimburse, this is the end of paragraph 2, to reimburse OPV up to $100,000 for facilitation fees. So I was that's why I'm a little bit surprised. And it even says confirming invoices submitted by the facilitator or facilitators. So my head was around facilitators not paying for a hydrologist to do technical advice in terms of where it goes. I would offer this, that I appreciate that people, you may not need somebody that goes, okay, now let's do our mission statement and all, been in enough of those things. But you do have the potential for some significant issues between M&I and Ag, some other issues, and sometimes having somebody that also can make sure that there's a reality check with Fox Canyon and all of that. So I guess I turn to Mr. Pratt and say, this is your board letter that you've signed. You said for facilitation fees. Are you comfortable with this being hydrologist? And
not yet, but we will be there before we sign an agreement. We can do non-compete clauses. We can do conflict of interest. We can talk about who the facilitators are, and we certainly know that your board wants to include all pumpers, all water users, and that's stated in the board letter. We would be developing agreements with all those terms and conditions in them. And if we can't get there, we don't sign the agreement.
Okay. So basically this is to authorize $100,000 if staff can both reach an agreement and bring that agreement back to the board for the board to see if the board is in agreement with those terms. Yeah. And that would include all pumpers.
We hadn't said the second part. In the interest of moving more quickly, we assumed we could get what you wanted, but if you want us to bring it back, we can do that.
It'd be good in light of the discussion.
Yeah, I think that's important. I'd like to see the agreement. If for no other reason, I want to make sure, and I have no conceptual objection to supporting OPV's efforts. I want to make sure, number one, I want to see what it's being spent on. Number two, for example, with LPUG, there was a specific project that we were being asked to jointly fund with Callegas in order to do a specific task. With that kind of definition, I don't have any problem considering. This is a bit too vague. But also, as Chairman Mulhart mentioned, we recently approved a $1.1 million contract with an outfit that, as best I can recall, was going to do nothing but facilitation. And part of what I want to see in the contract is that there isn't duplicate expense, there isn't duplicate effort, and they're not paying for the same thing twice. And I appreciate that's not what's intended, but I can't know that without seeing it.
So in my mind, the question is, staff was saying you were going to work those things in, things that we've raised, and if you can't get there, you can't get there. then OPUB decides what they're going to do. If you can get there, you feel confident you could get those things in. The question is, does it need to come back? And
Do you want it to?
OPV knows what it's going to do.
OVP, yeah.
Oh, yeah.
I won't
Okay,
call
let me,
them.
the question before the motion is it the consensus of the board that they want it to come back for final approval?
Yes.
Yes.
No.
I'm a no.
I'm willing to talk about what I'd like to think about it for a minute.
Okay.
Why are people a yes, I guess, is,
I
just know we.
I would, my personal opinion is a no, but if that's what the board wants, I'm okay with it. I'm not going to fight it. I mean,
Yeah, my sense is just, I know we're trying to make the May 31 deadline, but I also.
All right, go ahead. If somebody wants to make a motion to direct staff to go through this process and then present it to the board for the final approval, if that's what somebody wants to do, let's make that motion and we'll debate it.
I'll make that motion.
I'll second it.
Okay? The motion then is, as I understand it, to receive and file the report on the development of Groundwater Act methods charter for Oxnard Plain, Pleasant Valley Basin, direct staff to
Bring back to us an agreement.
Negotiate an agreement to execute an agreement on terms approved by agency council to provide up to $100,000 funding for consultant service to facilitate the development of allocation method of those basins and return it to the board for final approval.
Yeah, you'd have to remove the word execute.
Okay, so execute comes out.
Yeah, because that means he can sign it and it's an agreement, so we want it brought back.
Authorize the executive officers to negotiate an agreement
agreement.
on terms approved by agency council to provide up to $100,000 funding for consultation services to facilitate the development of an allocation methodology for those basins and return it to the board for final approval.
There you go.
Okay, everybody? Yes. All right. That's the motion. Yes. And a second. Jessica.
Hold on.
Hold on. I'm sorry.
So that we could discuss. I just want.
Okay.
What's the downsides of bringing it back, Mr. Pratt?
More staff time on board letters, more staff time getting we're very short on staff. You guys have given us an aggressive GSP schedule. I don't want to betray your trust, but I don't think we ever have. That's it. It's just a workload balancing.
How about timing in terms of moving forward with the work outside of staff's workload?
The extra time that will be required for this, that wouldn't be required if we weren't reporting back to your board, is preparing the staff report, making sure we get the recommendations spot on, having it reviewed, meeting with everybody, discussing it, and getting it in front of your board, the usual process that goes with a board letter. And it's not insignificant.
My question, I think you said that there is, I know there's time, that time you've identified. What about the time in terms of the product coming out? Is this causing a significant?
It still takes some time to, if you're talking about the agreement itself as the product, it's going to take some time.
The product of they're coming up with a recommendation. Can they continue to move forward?
Oh, yes, absolutely. And in the interest of full disclosure, you're going to buy, and I've had the discussion, if you don't approve it, he keeps moving. So that, if you don't approve it, it keeps moving. If you approve it and we got to come back to the board, it just slows us down. I don't believe it slows him down.
So okay, I guess, so they potentially can keep moving.
Yes.
I think in the interest here, quite frankly, if the language in here didn't say facilitators and then we heard hydrologists if we didn't hear such a significant difference between what the board letter says and what Jurgen is saying he intends to do with this, I was fine with just saying, hey, I'm sure you'll work it out. But it seems like there's a significant difference there. You're not even on board for that at this point in time. So it seems like it probably is appropriate for that to come back, and that's where I would stand.
Okay. We have a motion and a second to approve with the modifications I suggested and to bring it back to the board. Okay? Jessica?
Chair Mulhart?
Yes.
Director Craven?
Yes.
Director Bennett?
Yes.
Director West?
Yes.
Director Borchert?
Yes.
Okay, we have an executive officer administrative report as a receive and file.
So
One
moved.
item to report
Oh.
on
Okay.
a lighter note. We did receive the $250,000 grant we talked to your board about. So now, I mean, conceptually, the cost of the $1.1 million project is $850,000, so.
Good.
Okay, gone up by 100,000. Okay, I have a motion to receive and file. A second, please.
Second.
Okay, and do I hear any objection? Okay, it's so ordered. All right, Jeff, our next meeting is, okay, do we have a scheduled February Friday meeting?
You have one scheduled, but have we decided whether or not we're going to use it? The answer is no.
Okay, we haven't made the decision, so we
That's
could
correct.
get notice that we're actually going to do that meeting date.
That's correct.
Okay, very good.
I can tell you.
All right. Okay, anybody else? Meeting adjourned. Okay, good.